Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nur Rachmatiya I will explain about example of tragic comedy and tragic comedy. Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy. The two young lovers meet and fall in love, but because of the age-old feud between their families, they are destined for misfortune. Juliet's cousin Tybalt kills Romeo's friend Mercutio. Romeo kills Tybalt and becomes a criminal. The friar tries to help the couple by having Juliet fake her death, but Romeo thinks he is truly dead and kills himself, which leads to Juliet's suicide as well. 2 is Oscar Wilde's Lady Windermere's Fan. Sentimental comedy sees middle-class characters triumphing over moral indecence and deal heavily with damns or virtue and overcoming bad influence. Unlike other forms of comedy, sentimental comedy aims to provoke tears more than laughter. Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. Samuel Beckett Waiting for Godot can also be considered one of the high-quality examples of tragic comedy. There are many gestures, dialogues, actions, and situations which are packed with pure comedy. All varieties of musical gadgets have been used to create laughter. Example of drama from Elizabethan until the modern era. The first is Christopher Marlowe. His tragedies Tamburlaine the Great written in 1587 or 1588. The play is milestone in Elizabethan public drama. It marks a turning away from the clumsy language and loose plotting of the earlier Tudor dramatists and a new interest in fresh and vivid language, memorable action, and intellectual complexity. The synopsis: a Scythian shepherd. The Persian Emperor Misitis wants to send his army to destroy the Scythian shepherd and bandit, Tamburlaine. The emperor's brother, Khosrow, agrees to help, but secretly plots the, the overthrow of my Misitis to take the throne of himself. Meanwhile, in Scythia, Tamburlaine has captured and successfully brought Senocrate, the daughter of the Egyptian sultan. Misitis soldiers arrive to attack Tamburlaine, but he convinces them as well as Khosrow to join forces with him against Misitis instead. A double-crosser, Tamburlaine promises Khosrow the Persian crown and together they attack Misitis. However, after the battle is won, Tamburlaine takes the crown for himself. They fight and Khosrow is killed. Tamburlaine now has complete control over the Persian Empire. The cage, but Persia isn't enough. Tamburlaine turns his attention to Turkey and its emperor, Bajazet. He captures Bajazet and his wife, Sabina, and makes them his slaves, keeping the fifth ruler in a cage. Upon hearing of Tamburlaine's latest conquest, Bajazet kills himself by bashing his hand against the bars of the cage. When Sabina finds his body, she does likewise. Vestal virgins, Tamburlaine set his eyes on Damascus. During the battle, the governor sends a group of Vestal virgins to Tamburlaine's army, hoping to appease him. Tamburlaine declines his offer and has the virgins slaughtered with their remains displayed on the city walls. Tamburlaine wins the battle. Absolute power Sennacherib's father, the Sultan of Egypt, forced to stop Tamburlaine with the help of the Arabian king. Tamburlaine's army goes to the battle once more, killing the king of Arabia. Sennacherib begs Tamburlaine to spare her father, and he complies, turning the Sultan into a tributary king. Tamburlaine declares himself emperor of the entire continent and weds Sennacherib. Years later, Sigismund, the king of Hungary, and Orchanes, the king of Natalia, signed a peace treaty. Sigismund swears a solemn oath to come to Orchanes' aid should anyone move to invade his territory. Meanwhile, Tamburlaine and his followers advanced towards Natolia. On seeing Tamburlaine's force, Sigismund goes back on his word. However, Sigismund is defeated in battle and accepts his fate as divine punishment. That of the Persian queen, Sennacherib becomes ill, and Tamburlaine leaves battle to return to her side. Overcome with grief upon her death, Tamburlaine burns down the city where she died, forbidding anyone to rebuild it. A vow of revenge. Elsewhere, the son of Bajazet, Calpin, breaks out of jail and musters a group of tributary kings to challenge Tamburlaine, avenge his father's death, and regain his Turkish crown. The armies meet in battle with Tamburlaine victorious once again. A courtly son, Tamburlaine teaches his three sons, Amirus, Salabinus, and Calipas, about war. Two are cruel and eager to be on the battlefield. Calipas, however, doesn't have the same mentality as his father. When Tamburlaine discovers Calipas has stayed in his tent during battle, he kills his son for being a coward. Chariot of Kings. Tamburlaine wields a chariot drawn by the kings he has conquered and arrives in Babylon. There he hangs the governor from the city walls and orders every man, woman, and child to be thrown in the lake and drowned. Greater than God, Tamburlaine's savagery knows no bounds. He burns a copy of the Quran and declares himself better than any god, but conquerors cannot live forever. Tamburlaine falls ill and names his son for being a coward. Chariot of Kings. Tamburlaine builds a chariot drawn by the kings he has conquered and arrives in Babylon. There he hangs the governor from the city walls and orders every man, woman, and child to be thrown in the lake and drowned. Greater than God. Tamburlaine's savagery knows no bounds. He burns a copy of the Quran and declares himself better than any god. Second, Love's Comedy. Norwegian Kjærlighetens Comedy is a comedy by Henrik Ibsen. It was first published on 31 December 1862. Henrik Ibsen, 1828 until 1906, is the founder of modern theater, and his plays are performed all over the world. The synopsis is two students, Falk and Lynn, are staying at the country house of Mrs. Holm, romancing her two daughters, Anna and Schavenhild. Lynn has ambitions to be a missionary, Falk a great poet. Falk criticizes bourgeois society in his verse and insists that we live in the passionate moment. Lynn's proposal of marriage to Anna is accepted, but Swanhild rejects the change to become folk muse, as a poetry is merely writing, and he can do that on his own and without really risking himself or his beliefs. Folk is liberated by his words and decides to put ideas into action. When Lynn is persuaded by Anna's friends not to live as a missionary but stay in a cozy existence looking after his wife, Falk denounces the lot of them, saying that their marriage have nothing to do with love. Society is outraged and doesn't wish to be reminded of the split between ideal and reality. Folk is os- ostracized, but Schoenhield admires his courage. They plan to run off together and leave the ideal. The pastor Strawman and the Clearstrever attempt to pursue Folk from his course, but the but the means of respectability and security cannot assuage him. Finally, the rich businessman Galstad asks whether their relationship can survive the winning of the first flush of love. Falk and Schoenhield admit that it cannot, and Schoenhield accepts Galstad's proposal of a safe, financially secured marriage rather than solely the experience of her love for Falk by saying it died. Falk lives to write songs which celebrate an untainted love, and Swanhild sits gloomy amongst the world of convention, a housewife who a housewife who once had passion and no lives on its memory. The famous play rather in tragic. The first one is Sophocles, Ancient Greek, is one of three ancient Greek tragedians whose plays have survived, one of classical Athens' three great tragic playwrights. The best known of his 123 dramas is Oedipus the King, Oedipus Rex. This tragedy is the most famous work of Sophocles, a Greek playwright who lived over 2,000 years ago. Oedipus discovers that years ago he murdered his biological father and unknowingly married his biological mother. The circumstances are grotesque, but the real tragedy stems from the bloody reactions of the characters as each participant learns the unbearable truth. The citizens are filled with shock and pity. Jocasta, the mother-wife, hangs herself, and Oedipus uses the pins from her dress to gouge out his eyes. Creon, Jocasta's brother, takes over the throne, and Oedipus goes on to wander around Greece as a rich example of men's folly. The second is William Shakespeare was a renowned English poet, playwright, and actor born in 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon. Shakespeare was a prolific writer during the Elizabethan and Jacobean age of British theatre, sometimes called the English Renaissance of the early modern period. An age-old vendetta between two powerful families erupts into bloodshed. A group of mugs montages risks further conflict by gate-crashing a couplet party. A young lovesick Romeo Montague falls instantly in love with Juliet Capulet, who is due to marry her father's choice, the Count Paris. With the help of Juliet nurse, the woman arrange for the couple to marry next day, but Romeo attempt to halt the street fight leads to that of Juliet's own cousin, Tybalt, for which Romeo is banished. In the desperate attempt to be reunited with the Romeo, Juliet follows the friar's boat and fakes her own death. The message fails to reach Romeo, and believing Juliet that he takes his life in her tomb. Juliet wakes to find Romeo's corpse beside her and kills herself. The grieving family agree to end their feud. The famous playwright in comedy one is Aristophanes. Ancient Greek was a comic playwright or comedy writer of ancient Athens and a poet of old Attic comedy. 11 of his 40 plays survive virtually complete. These provide the most valuable examples of a genre of comic drama known as old comedy and are used to define it, along with fragments from dozens of lost plays by Aristophanes and his contemporaries. In Clouds, an old man is adept and wants to find out how to get out of it by learning clever arguments from the philosopher Socrates. Socrates didn't mind his friend Aristophanes making fun of him. He even stood up during the performance to let audience see he took it in good humor. 2. William Shakespeare was a renowned English poet, playwright, and actor born in 1564 in Stratford-upon-Avon. Shakespeare was a prolific writer during the Elizabethan and Jacobean age of British theatre, sometimes called the English Renaissance of the early modern period, an age of an age-old vendetta began between two powerful families erupts into bloodshed. As You Like It, as a pastoral comedy by William Shakespeare, believed to have been written in 1599 and first published in the first folio in 1623. The play's first performance is uncertain, third a performance at Wilton House in 1603 has been suggested as a possibility. Rosalind and her cousin escape into the forest and find Orlando Rosalind's love. Disguised as a boy's shepherd, Rosalind has Orlando woo her under the guise of curing him of his love for Rosalind. Rosalind reveals she is a girl and marries Orlando during a group wedding at the end of the play. The famous, the famous playwright in tragic comedy, William the first one is William Shakespeare. The Merchant of Venice is a famous example of tragic comedy because there are elements of both tragedy and comedy, such as Perdius cross-dressing as she does in the both scene order to play a lawyer. Shylock is in turns a comic character and a tragic figure. We are not meant to read him only as one or the other, and third, there is a marriage at the end of the play, also typical of comedy. It doesn't contain particularly light-hearted subject matter throughout. Second is Anton Chekhov is Russian playwright and master of the modern short story. He was a literary artist of laconic precision who probed below the surface of life, lying there the secret motives of his characters. Chekhov's best play and short stories like complex plots and neat solutions. The Cherry Orchard by Anton Chekhov. The student Trofimov is idealistic and revolutionary, and speaks of important issues of his day. Yet there are comic aspects to his character as well. He is naive enough to be the butt of other characters' jokes and scorned. Anton Chekhov had originally imagined the Cherry Orchard to be a comedy, and labeled it as such, thinking it to be a farce. However, many directors bring out the more serious and tragic nature of the play, but elements exist dually in this tragic comedy example. The characteristic history and origin of tragic drama. The Greek tragedy was a popular and influential form of drama performed in theaters across ancient Greece from the late 6th century BCE. The most famous playwrights of the genre were Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, and many of their works were still performed centuries after their initial premiere. The exact origin of Tragoeda are debated among scholars. Some have linked the rise of the genre, which began in Athens, to the earlier art form, the lyrical performance of epic poetry. Others suggest a strong link with the rituals performed in the worship of Dionysus, such as the sacrifice of gods, a song ritual called Trichodia, and the viewing of Max. Indeed, Dionysus became known as the god of theatre, and perhaps there is another connection: the drinking rites, which result in the worshipper losing full control of their emotion and in effect becoming another person, much as actors who Hippocrates hope to do when performing. The elements of tragedy, tragic hero, and tragic flow in catharsis. A tragic flaw is a character trait that triggers the tragic hero's defeat. The flaw might be a decision or mistake the character makes or a limitation they possess. For instance, the little character in Macbeth has the tragic flaw of unbridled ambition, which drives him to join forces with his power-hungry wife and try to murder the king. A tragic hero is a central character whose choice or weakness lead to their downfall. They initially possess some admirable or valiant qualities such as bravery, compassion, or decency, but their bad judgment or moral failings, however momentary, result in a failure that has disastrous consequences. Catharsis is a purification of emotion. In Aristotle's definition of tragedy, the audience undergoes a sort of catharsis, but so do the character. Even if the characters don't survive or experience any type of redemption in the end, the process of catharsis can emotionally or spiritually speaking cleanse them of their pain. The characteristic history and origin of comedy drama. Comedy of humor is a dramatic genre most closely associated with the English playwright Ben Jonson from the late 6th century. The term derives from the Latin humor, more properly humor, meaning liquid, and it used in the medieval and Renaissance medical theory that the human body held the balance of four liquids or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow color, and black bile melancholy. When properly balanced, these humors were thought to give the individual a healthy mind and healthy body. The classic conception of comedy, which began with Aristotle in ancient Greece of the 4th century BCE and persists through the present, holds that is primarily concerned with humans and social beings rather than as private persons, and that its function is frankly corrective. The comic artist's purpose is to hold a mirror up to society to reflect its follies and vices in the hope that they will, as a result, be mended. The 20th century French philosopher Henri Bergson shared this view of the corrective purpose of laughter. Specifically, he felt laughter is intended to bring the comic character back into conformity with his society, whose logic and conventions he abandons when he slackens in the attention that is due to life. Besides, the word comedy seems to be connected by derivation with the Greek verb meaning to revolt, and comedy arose out of revolts associated with the rites of Dionysus, a god of vegetation. The origin comedy are thus spun up with vegetation ritual. Tragicomedy dramatic work incorporating both tragic and comic elements. When coined by the Roman dramatist Plautus in the 2nd century BC, the word denoted a play in which gods and men, masters or slavers, refers to roles traditionally assigned to them, gods and heroes acting in comic burlesque and slaves adopting tragic dignity. The characteristic history and origin of tragicomedy. Tragicomedy dramatic work in comparing both tragic and comedy elements. When coined by the Roman dramatist Plautus in the 2nd century BC, the word denoted a play in which gods and men, masters and slaves reversed the roles traditionally assigned to them, gods and heroes acting in comic burlesque and slaves adopting tragic dignity. Tragedies are first heard of as stage plays in the Dionysiac celebration in Athens at the turn of the 5th century BCE, and comedians appear as a contrasting type of a play century later. Aristotle said that tragedies dealt with spurious serious matters and comedies with publica trivial subject. Tragedies aim at arousing and then purging emotions such as pity and fear. Effective tragedies need not need not end in disaster. He gives the highest praise to the happily resolved Iphigenia among the tyrants of Sophocles and among narrative poems, since taking is not essential to tragedy. He considers the odds he to have a tragic story as well as the lead through. He notes at one point that epic of such a double plot story, good and for the good, bad for the bad, are more appropriate to comedy. Thank you very much for the Thank you very much for the attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.